boot camp starts May 2005. I guess his knee is healed. He goes, and it's a lot of talk about how it was really terrible, super difficult, a lot of running, a lot of terrible things, but everybody else was breaking into the strain of it, but they couldn't break him because he was already broken. So good luck trying to make it worse. For him, it was fun. I mean, it was no picnic, but they weren't going to, he relished how hard it was. It felt good for it to be hard. He felt like, just like he did back in the Australian outback, it was stripping him of all the unnecessaries in his life. And he was becoming more and more and more the essence of who he should be, and all the impurities were being drained away. And he just loved he calls them the color sergeants. So in America, we would have called them the drill sergeants, but there they call them the color sergeants. Those screaming banshees were taking everything out of him that needed to be taken out of him. He idolized them for that. And then, you know, he goes on a lot of asides. He makes a lot of sort of philosophical comments about the military, which I think he would have been better left not saying. I just don't think he knows what he's talking about. I'm not saying that it just doesn't come off as very genuine when you know that he was there, but it was play for him, because he was never going to ever be in any actual real danger. But he wants to play big man on campus. You know, here he is. He's just like one of the other guys, but you're not like one of the other guys. Those other guys are putting their life on the line for pennies. I mean, they're laying their life down for their country, and they are really laying their life down. You are playing like you're doing that. You get a spot next to some of the greatest men on earth, and you get to play like you're one of them. But your life was never in jeopardy. It couldn't be. And so, I don't know, it's just hard for me to hear him talk about it, because it just feels like you aren't one of them. He says that the exercises that they did were all supposed to be about war, but to him they were about death. Okay, it's a little bit of semantics there, isn't it? Isn't war death? I mean, it's not like you just sussed out a real detail that none of the rest of us had figured out. He says the whole motif of the Army training was death. How to avoid it, but also how to face it head on. Okay, well, how astute of you for figuring that out. And then he says that, of course, because it's all about death, they had to go stand on the graves of some of the fallen and read a poem. And he says that they'd read a poem called For the Fallen, and that the poem predated the ghastly wars of the 20th century, so it still had a trace of innocence. And I just want to say to him this. Okay. How much military history do you know if you think that before the 20th century, war was somehow innocent? Have you studied anything? Have you studied any war? I mean, I don't expect him to know anything about the Civil War. Why should he? That's an American war. All you have to do is read one page about the Battle of Gettysburg, and you'll realize that there was no innocence to war, that there never has been. I know what he's trying to get at, but he's just making these points, and he's just saying these things, and I'm like, you're just talking out of your butt. Like, what are you even saying right now to me? The innocence of war before the 20th century. Okay, how romantic. It's just romanticizing all sorts of things. And then he says this. And this, too, I just thought, he's always talking about how he's not much of an intellectual, how he doesn't like to read or anything, but then he throws in these little asides. He says things constantly, these little asides, that are aimed at making you take note of his intelligence. Like he's just kind of casually thrown in there, just real cash. And he says that it was striking how much of our earliest training was intercut, leavened with poetry. The glory of dying, the beauty of dying, the necessity of dying. These concepts were pounded into our heads along with the skills to avoid dying. Sometimes it was explicit, but sometimes it was right in our faces. When we were herded in the chapel, we'd look up and see etched in stone, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Sweet and fitting it is to die for one's country. Words first written, now this is what I'm talking about, listen carefully, friends. Words first written by an ancient Roman, an exile, and then repurposed by a young British soldier who died for his country. Repurposed ironically, but no one told us that. They certainly weren't etched ironically into that stone. And then in the next paragraph, he goes on to talk about how much he hated the long hours when he had to sit in the hard chairs at Faraday Hall and Churchill Hall and read books and memorize dates and analyze famous battles and write essays on the most esoteric concepts of military strategy. And he says that these are the real trials for him at Sandhurst. Okay, well, you can imagine that that's true. But this whole little aside about the Latin words that were etched over the chapel, that they'd been repurposed by they had been repurposed almost sarcastically by another British soldier. Like, he throws that in at us just to be like, I know some stuff. Not that dumb. But then you just go on to tell me that, but I'm not really that smart. It's like, what game are you trying to play at? Like, what character are you playing here? You know, the casually smart guy that, you know, you would never suspect because he never seems like he is, but then he'll say something with blinding brilliance. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being nitpicky. Probably I am. But, you know, he goes on and on and on and on about how it was in the training and, you know, the bayonet training when they'd all have to run at these sandbags shaped like people and stab them and stab them and stab them while they listened to some pounding music and scream, kill, kill, kill. And even when the music was off, there'd still be people stabbing and stabbing and stabbing and screaming, kill, kill, kill. And, you know, then they'd all laugh like they hadn't just seen somebody lose their mind. It's a bit scary. Okay, now, if you thought the bolt going through his knee was disgusting, hold on, friends, because it's about to get a lot worse. At one point, they had to go on this long ruck march. Okay, well, who wouldn't? I mean, of course, we suspect that's what he's going to be doing. That's what they do. And it was terribly wet. And sopping wet, driving rain. They were marching, big packs on their backs. At one momentary stop. Okay, you guys. One momentary stop, a checkpoint, I felt a burning in my foot. I sat on the ground, pulled off my right boot and sock, and the bottom of my foot peeled away. It's too disgusting for words. I just can't stand the thought of foot injuries. Trench foot. The soldier beside me shook his head. Oh, you can't go on. I was gutted. But I confess, I was also relieved. We don't doubt you were. So he slumped off. Goodbye, lad. See you back at camp. And he gets into the ambulance, only too happy to be rid of this hard work. And then a color sergeant comes. Color Sergeant Spence comes to him. He said, could he have a word? And Harry hopped down, out, limped over to a nearby tree. And he says to Harry, he says, Mr. Wales, you've got one last push. You've literally got 6 or 8 miles left. That's all. I know you're fit. I know your feet are shit, but I suggest you don't quit. I know you can do this. You know you can do this. Push on. You'll never forgive yourself if you don't. And he didn't say it in like a screaming voice, like just coming to him and saying, look, don't give up on this. You can do this. So he finishes. It's terrible. He tapes his feet. He can't hardly walk for days after that, but he feels a lot of victory in having finished things off. And, you know, of course, he circles back and thanks that guy for showing him a side of himself that he did not know that he possessed. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. More talk about how it was so hard for everybody at boot camp. Tell us something we don't know. And then it's time for graduation. And he particularly enjoyed this because he had gone to Sandhurst first because he did not have to go to university. University was not in the cards for him. So when he graduated, he outranked William, who had just entered. So William had to salute him. Oh, well, how the spare has risen above the air. Dear diary day, if ever there was one. But it's like, okay, well, he saluted you, but he was forced. So don't go wearing that as a feather in your cap. But and then he talks about how he's looking forward to northern Iraq because that's what's in the cards for him coming up the pipe. That's where he's going to be. And he says my unit would be relieving another unit, which had spent months doing advanced reconnaissance, dangerous work, constantly dodging roadside IEDs and snipers. In that same month, 10 British soldiers had been killed, and in the previous 6 months, 40. But not you, Harry. Okay? See, because you don't need to include yourself in that sacrifice. You won't ever face that sacrifice. You get to be alongside for the ride. And in some ways, I almost feel sorry for him because wouldn't it feel terrible to be along to see all that and know you could never sacrifice what they were sacrificing? that your privilege encapsulated you and put you in a cocoon, so that you experienced the horror, but there was never the catharsis of knowing that your sacrifice could also be included in theirs. It seems almost worse to be there to witness it, but to have nothing to give in return to your comrade standing next to you, that you could never sacrifice your life for them the way they were sacrificing their life for you. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit saying too much, but he was really ready to get out of there, quite frankly, because there was a spy in the ranks. Somebody in their surrounding vicinity, somebody in their circle of people was feeding stories to the press, like really specific stories. He says he was really ready to get out of England because war, death, whatever had to be better than being in Britain. I mean, how very overdramatic. Apparently, somebody had leaked to the press that William had left him his voicemail pretending that he was Chelsea. Okay, so, and then also that he had asked JLP to help him on a Sandhurst research project. Okay. Well, neither one of those are scandalous stories. So what if the press knows that William left you a funny voicemail and that you asked a very well-trained individual in your inner circle to help you figure something out about a research project? He didn't write the research project for you. No one was saying you cheated. You just were asking for help with it. Okay, well, big whoop. But he says that the question is, how could the papers have known such deeply private matters? Somebody's feeding things to the press. Somebody's saying something. And he says that at one point, they even started wondering if it was Marco. Like, that's how frantic they became in their pursuit of finding out who the spy was. Like, they trusted no one. Didn't trust their bodyguards, who they'd always seen as brothers. Didn't trust even Marco, their private secretary. But somebody, some evildoer was in their ranks. And who could it be? So he says, and this is where we leave off on part 1. Please put me on a battlefield where there are clear rules of engagement, where there's some sense of honor. Well, I don't know if he could find the sense of honor, even if it slapped him across the face. He deals so inexplicably and unbelievably treacherous in all of his dealings. Would he know honor? Would he know honor if it came knocking at his door and spit in his face? Who knows? Okay, so that is the end of part 1. We have completed at least 1/3 of this book. Have we made it? Are we still alive? Can we breathe after all of that horrible... It's like sucks the oxygen right out of the room with his complaining. But all right, so that is the end of that.